Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Tax, the show for growth-minded CPAs and real estate pros in tax. I'm TJ Sponsel. Today's episode, we're going to continue the conversation with Sarah Turner, president of Lumino Leadership, on people development. Sarah, welcome back.
Oh, it's great to be here.
So for those of you who didn't catch the first episode, we're going to do something a little different on Let's Talk Tax here for a couple podcasts and talk about people. Mm-hmm. We are in the people business, and so we've got to make it really big investments in people. Mm-hmm. So I would really encourage you to jump on our library and check out the first episode, because I think Sarah made some excellent points and observations that can help many of you as you deal with the constantly challenging issue of people in our respective firms. Today's episode, we're going to focus a little bit on a couple things. Mm-hmm. Number one, the big one, the macro is culture. Yeah. And we're going to specifically maybe zero in on some communication things.
Yeah.
Obviously, in today's society, culture is huge and for companies. It really is what separates you from the pack. There's all kinds of threats coming in at culture because it takes a lot of work to build culture. Mm-hmm. It takes more work to maintain it. And it takes even greater work to scale it. Mm. And so kind of with that grand opening, Sarah, I mean, kind of what, obviously you've given us a lot of counsel over the years. What do you see firms do well with culture, and what do you see, how do they botch their culture?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. And so I'll back up, and as I have mentioned to you before, part of it starts with understanding what is culture. It's a word that's thrown out a lot, and I don't think people often nail down exactly what it is, because if you don't know what it is, it's hard to build it and maintain it. And so what I always tell people, and if I can find a way to do this that is appropriate and approved by all parties, I would engage this 100%. I would say, if I had an invisible drone and I put it into a space where I could track your team and yourself for a period of maybe 30 days, and at the end of those 30 days, the drone would be able to look for the most consistent behavior seen by those who are inside your company. And at the end of that month, it would print out a report, and it would say, here's what is so consistent. This is your culture. This is what exists inside your organization. These are the behavioral norms. Often what I would tell people is that that's such an insightful place to begin when it comes to building culture, because sometimes organizations, they state what they want it to be. They have great mantras. They often have a descriptive paragraph or maybe 5 words that represent them. But when you go to look at behaviors, are those truths? Because you can't say you have a culture unless the behavior depicts that it exists. And so for more organizations than I can count, this is the worst way to say it, but they print, post, and pray. That's exactly what they do. They print, this is what we are. They post it around, and they hope that people adhere to it, and it becomes their culture, and it doesn't. You've heard me talk about this. I think that's called what is often referred to as the action trap. The actions I want are for you to live this paragraph. I'm going to post it, and then I hope to get the results. And it doesn't work. So where you build culture is you go down to the bottom of the results pyramid, and you start with experiences. So if we wanted, as an example, we're going to parlay into communication. If we wanted people to be open, then what are we doing to make them feel like that's what we are here? We're open. Are we willing and able to be that daily so that people start to believe that's what we do around here? And then when they believe it, they start to do it as an action, and it becomes the results, and it becomes your culture. And so I would challenge anyone listening to pause for a second and say it out loud. What would your we hope list include for our culture? What would the drone's output of one 30-day period of behavior say you have, and are they in sync? And the minute you have that awareness, that becomes a piece of intel that you can use as a leader to start deciding, then how do we cultivate it better? So I think those who do it well, let's start with that, are almost always the ones who are aware. Let's start with that point of reference. You have to know where you're not seeing what you're hoping to see. And then two, you have to have the courage to address it. You have to start conversations.
Well, I can tell you one kind of guiding principle of our firm is, years ago, we came up with this statement of educate, empower, and reward. Mm-hmm. And the concept was, and I remember the day it was blurted out the first time. I know exactly where I was sitting. And the idea was, we wanted to create a culture in our firm where everybody could ultimately have ownership of a project, of a responsibility, and of success. Mm-hmm. And realizing that that cycle never stops. Whether you're a staff person that goes to a senior, that goes to a manager, that goes to a senior manager, goes to a practice leader, that cycle of educate, empower, reward is very, very powerful. And it was kind of our guiding light, if you will. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big vision statement guy. I'm tainted. I was growing up with the mindset, actions speak louder than words. So I'm going to let our fruit, what the results speak for who we are as a firm. But I think one thing that allowed us to, it really held us accountable is this whole concept, educate, empower, reward. But the thing is, we got bigger. It worked really, really well when there was 20 of us. When we got to 80, 90, 100 of us, we found that there was a really big void that was left. And that is supporting people that we are empowered. Because if you are empowered, if you're a senior consultant or a manager and you've been newly empowered on something and you have a teammate that reports to you and they came to you with a question, they didn't like the question, well, we're not that big where they could just go around to a senior manager or a shareholder and that senior manager and shareholder solved the problem and didn't go back to the newly empowered person and saying, hey, let's work together to solve this problem. And so that has been, I think everybody, as you look to culture, you got to find, okay, what's your center? What are you clinging to? Like I said, not a mission statement, vision statement guide. That they get hung on the wall. You dedicate a lot of time and resources to building one, and nobody knows it. I wanted something quick that everybody could identify with and say, all right, I remember that.
Yeah, and the rally cry concept, we've talked about this too. It's something short, it's a mantra, but one of the keys that I know that the firm has tried to instill in making sure it's cultural is you have to talk about it all the time. It has to come up all the time, right?
Yes, and we'll be in a shareholder meeting, and you're sitting there talking about who's assigned this responsibility, and we were in a conversation just last week about a new technology, and I looked at my partners and I said, hey, listen, this isn't our issue to solve. I mean, we can't sit there and say educate, empower, support, and reward, and never do it.
Right.
And I was like, why are we sitting here not wasting our time? It doesn't impact us.
That's right.
I'm not going to adopt this new technology. I'm removed from that step. Let's get people that are involved in that step daily, and they're going to choose a solution that's better for them.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't we? As leaders, we're always complaining about not enough time to answer emails. Then we've got to let go of some responsibilities and let other people embrace. Number one, it's a good test. Who's going to embrace that? Who's going to own it? Who's going to be accountable to it? And then the success, you see them be successful at it. What's better than that?
Yeah. And one of the things, too, that is really valuable is you start to, something I talk about a lot, if you take something you want to be, like culture, and you decide you want to see it grow and thrive, and you've said this before, as you grow, it becomes even harder. One of the things that you have to do is it has to be present in almost every aspect of the employee experience. So it can't just be something that when somebody starts, you say, hey, we have this cool mantra, and so we want to introduce you to it. And then they don't understand it. They don't see it. So you take a moment, just like you described last week where it happened, and then you almost put a spotlight on it and you say, hey, this is exactly what we mean. You could sometimes do something, right? We talked about this in our last discussion. You could be a doer, or you could choose to empower someone and be a developer in that moment.
Sure.
And if you can, again, help people understand that not only is it expected, but it's what helps us thrive as an organization, then people start to understand the expectation is there. I need to adhere to it, and it becomes cultural, and people do it over and over. And again, not easy, but with consistency, it can become real.
And to take that a step farther, so we always think of development and training, we think of our young staff.
Yeah.
But you get someone that's in their mid-30s, and they've made senior manager, and they're newly empowered. We still have to develop them.
Oh, yes.
We still have to have conversation with them. And I think that's something that I also see is that we promote people, and we're like, oh, this is a great moment. This is theirs now. Well, yeah, it's theirs. No, it's more of ours.
Yeah.
And we've got to help them be able to know not right from wrong, but hey, here's some experiences I have. These are some blind spots or this is a big mountain road you're going up to, and you don't even know what's on the next curve. Let me help you with that. That doesn't mean you're interfering. You're just giving them some guidance. And I think sometimes it's two things. We're holding on to it so tight that we never let anybody control, or we let it fly away and we don't have any control.
Yeah.
And I think there is guardrails that is, from a cultural standpoint, to build people up so they are successful, so they're not driving off the side of the road and creating bad habits or getting frustrated.
Yeah. Well, and to your point earlier, I think that's why the organization decided to add the word support. That's exactly what you just described.
That was the goal.
And that loosely falls under the category of coaching. But I will tell you, one thing you and I have talked about, TJ, is that sometimes coaching comes with some hard dialogues.
Great segue. Great segue. And because
Right?
I think that is the absolute truth. That was actually the next point that I was going to go down with you, is that having that candid conversation.
Yeah.
And that's something that so many people fear. I mean, walk us through that.
Oh, wow. well, how much time do we have? Because this is a space that is underutilized. It should be more prominent. More people should have comfort and confidence in it, and they don't. And so if you had one place to invest in your culture, it should be communication, but more importantly, open dialogue that transparently is deep in the level of respect. So you're talking because you respect what we can get out of it together so deeply. So part of the structure of having great candor has a lot to do with a combination of two very important things. One, you have to be willing to be clear and challenge what you've seen with other people, but challenge sometimes gets a bad reputation. Challenge doesn't mean negative or push back or be overly mean, angry, rude, frustrated as you compare notes. It's more, I noticed something that is worth talking about. Can I challenge us on this? Can I unpack this with you? Can we walk through this together? But you can't sugarcoat it. You can't buff it up. You can't act like it didn't happen. You have to engage in the dialogue. So part of the formula of candor is you say, hey, let's challenge this together. But the other half is you have to go back to that word support. You have to care about what we can create together. You have to show that you're in. You have to show that you're part owner. It's not just you. It's not just me. Together, we can figure this out. But as observers, we walk around being observers of people's contributions all the time. And I think what our biggest goal should be is to carry a sense of responsibility that if I am an observer of your contributions and I have an insight that I could share, I owe you a conversation. And let's talk. And that's where communication becomes an advocacy point for growth, because people now have information they didn't have on their own. And part of it is that it's not as if people are trying to lack awareness. Sometimes they just need someone to point something out to them. And with awareness, they can grab onto it. They can be empowered to grow, and it becomes an amazing outcome. But without the knowledge is the first part. So you have to be able to communicate. You can't, and we talk about this all the time. We're from the Midwest, TJ, and we talk about Midwest nice. That's a thing. It's not just the Midwest. I mean, I was just in Utah last week and people are like, that's a thing here too. That's not just the Midwest. So what we find is sometimes cultures grow up with, let's put our arms around people. Let's help them grow. And we don't realize sometimes the best way to do that is to have conversations about, hey, did you know this? If I can make you aware of this, what could it be? Right? Where could that go?
Well, and what we've seen is that those forced conversations, and what I mean by forced conversations happen a couple times a year around here.
Oh, right.
During bonus time, okay, and during promotion time.
Yeah.
Is that individual didn't get promoted. Yeah. They didn't get the pay raise they thought they want. They didn't get the bonus they thought they deserved. And that forces us to have conversations because now they're coming in and saying, why not me? Well, we now have to give them a status report that may be 12 months or 24 months overdue of here's what you haven't done. And those are the worst days, some of the worst days we can have, because you're focusing on here's why you didn't. And instead, if we had them timely and had them more contemporaneously, you could say, here's your opportunity. Here's what we can do. And I can tell you, we fail at this as a firm, and I hope that we get better from learning from having the scars and bruises, because there's some people that have done a really, really good job here, but we've had to have those awkward conversations. Here's why you didn't, instead of here's your opportunity. And those are so much more fun to sit down and say, hey, this is what you've got to do. This is an opportunity for you. Yeah. You know, one of the things, and you joined us for an internal planning meeting earlier, actually last month, about what does the firm need from you and what do you need from the firm. Yeah. And it was such a revealing situation because you had very talented people in a room saying, here's what I need from the firm. And then we in turn as a firm go, here's what we need from you. It wasn't an evaluation. It was an opportunity. Yeah. It was an opportunity to hear, what do you want to contribute to the firm? Okay. And for us to say, here's what we need you to contribute to the firm.
Yeah. And, you know, speaking of that exact moment, what I think is a reference to your culture is when people are willing to admit, I don't know if I'm where I need to be. Can I get some candor from this room? I'm open to it. What an amazing moment. And you and I heard several senior leaders say, I'm doing something new. Firm asked me and needed an opportunity for me to kind of make a shift. And by the way, I'm just starting it. And maybe it's a person in the room who has 25 years of experience and you think, wait, what? They're asking for help? It's a great example. We're never done growing. You're never done. And you need insights from other people. So being willing to be vulnerable and saying, hey, I'd love some feedback from this room. What are you seeing? What advice could you give me? And when you have that kind of behavior, people start feeling comfortable to say, you know, great that you asked. Let's talk about it. Here's a couple of observations. And then you start to see it more and more that people are willing to say, let's challenge that together. And let's invest in what we can do with the outcome of the dialogue. And candor becomes part of your culture, which should be a target. It's just so hard to get there.
Well, in having that open dialogue allows everyone to, there's opportunities for other people to take the responsibilities. I mean, leadership is lonely. Let's face it. It can be extremely lonely. I don't say it as a martyr. I say that because that's the fact. But if you can bring more people in and having communication, obviously they've got to show an ability and some emotional intelligence. There's other dynamics that come into play to qualify for them for that. But share those responsibilities. Now they've taken some ownership, because guess what? They may do it better than you can do it.
Yeah.
And I look at all the things as our firm has grown over the years, and I see what we want, where we want to go, and it gives me a lot of confidence and a lot of hope to know we can get there, because it's not just Dave McGuire and TJ Sponsel. It's just not the 5 shareholders of McGuire Sponsel. It's about 15 people that now, of a 100-person firm that we brought in, saying, okay, we all are going to participate in this because we're having communication. So it's just not downward and upward communication, it's side-to-side communication. So when there's an opportunity for an investment in a new practice line or invest in a key hire, you have the other practice lines that aren't in it every day have the confidence and the hope and the belief in where you're making the investment.
Yeah. And let's talk about that for just a moment. As you were describing that, you said it's not just the shareholders. Organizations that grow similar to the trajectory that McGuire Sponsel has been on, you go from, you're in your 15s and 20s, you got 15, 20 employees, to, okay, we have 100. It's not just creating culture. Sustaining culture becomes a huge challenge. You have these natural core things that became you, and we want to keep those because they're us. And it's harder and harder to do that when you have a reach of the number of offices and regions represented and the number of people that we are growing to. And I think what you just described has to be part of the formula. It cannot be up to 5 people to maintain culture. It has to be empowered to all leaders, but you take that middle core and you say, let's give you a voice, bring this to life, keep it going, and help us evolve. Just the example of going from the EER mantra to the EESR, right? Adding support to this key element of your culture was evolution. And part of that is just being mindful that we'll have iterations of it, sure. There'll be changes, sure. But if we want a core, it can't just be up to 5 people to keep it. You have to let go and empower. And it's happening. It's fun to see that here.
Well, and we don't like to talk about failures.
Yeah.
It's too humbling.
Yeah.
But, as you grow and scale, you're gonna miss the mark.
You will.
Okay. And I've told our team repeatedly, we have these annual staff retreats, and you've obviously, Sarah's been part of them for a long, long time. But I tell them every year, it's okay to fail as long as we're learning something from it. Yeah. And we had an unfortunate situation just recently where we missed the mark. And I'm confident enough in our firm. We have good bones. We're fine. We made it right with the client. But there was the communication that I had with the person that was the result that caused it. Okay, they had the comfort to come and talk to their leadership, their practice leadership, and say, "Hey, I missed this," and we were able to own it with the client, quickly rectify it, and move on. What happens if our culture would not have been communication? What happens if we wouldn't have the Educate, Empower, Support, Reward program? It could have been. It couldn't have been a learning moment, or teaching moment. We could have lost a client. We could have degraded the relationship we have with the alliance partner. A lot of things could have gone wrong. But having that culture of communication, say, hey, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, there's a lot of good, but we're going to talk about from a 360-degree angle. So we are sustaining our culture and we're growing our culture.
Yeah. And I think, again, it comes back to that has to be pervasive. It has to be everywhere. Culture is only representative of what you see most. And so if it's everywhere, and when you have multiple locations and your geography footprint starts to grow, that's where you really have to be mindful of letting some of those advocates within some of those regions really help us create that sustainability, and that empowerment becomes real. And you need it. You have to have it.
And I would tell you, the things that as leadership, we've got to be hyper aware of our people.
Yep.
And we've got to be very intentional at communication.
Absolutely.
And we cannot miss an opportunity because we have so much on our plate that if, and I'm not patting myself on the back, but just something recently, And one of my colleagues said something. I was like, I got to talk to him. And I literally was just walking out before we shot this podcast, and I ran into him and I said, hey, I want to pull you aside real quick and tell you this.
Yeah.
Because we've got to be intentional in communicating, because we have so much on our plate. Our people have so much on their plate, and we do not want to miss the opportunity to develop our people and inspire them.
Yeah. And I say this all the time, but if you look at the number of competing priorities that any single person in any company juggles, it's always more than one. And so sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's 30. And when you have an observation like you just described of a peer or a person on our teams, and you say, okay, I've got 11 things, I'll put that on number 12. What ends up happening is we juggle and we have that competing priority go to the bottom of our list. And a lot of times days pass and then we think, oh, it's been too long now, just cross it off. And so if we decide that having dialogues and conversations and communicating, even the stuff that may be harder to hear but is so useful, we end up having that placed as that's just as important as some other things. It has to be in my day. I have to put that into. And again, if we have enough of that, then we end up having communication be one of the biggest assets you'll ever have as an organization, and it will set you apart. And that's what people want.
Well, I can tell you this, is that I know in a firm, technical firm like McGuire Sponsel is, sometimes this stuff, this intangible, this squishy stuff can be the most uncomfortable.
Right.
But I can tell you that it has made a remarkable impact on our firm. And I can sit here, and I won't embarrass them on this podcast, but I can think of a number of people in our firm that we've made investments in developing. They've gone through your program, and their careers are different in very short order because of how intentional we have been about development.
Yeah.
Okay. Sarah, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And I will provide a little plug for Sarah's firm, Lumino Leadership. She's fantastic. If anybody's interested in talking to Sarah, please reach out to me directly, and I will be happy to make an introduction to you, because I can't speak high enough about Sarah and the impact that she's had on McGuire Sponsel, and more importantly, the people of McGuire Sponsel. So thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Oh, the respect is mutual. Thank you so much, TJ.
Okay, take care. Thanks for tuning in today. Remember to subscribe to Let's Talk Tax podcast channel on YouTube to be notified and receive all new episodes.